All right, our first goal for today is we are going to practice evaluating absolute value equations. You've actually done this before, but something that I want to review before we get into solving absolute value equations. The rules for solving absolute value equations are actually shorter than the other equations that we've been solving, but there's one important aspect of it that we'll get to here shortly. All right, the first thing that I want to review with you guys that we talked about earlier this school year, and we talked about as a 7th grader, is that absolute value is the distance a number is from 0. So because we're talking about distance, absolute value is always positive. So when you actually take the absolute value of a number, it's always going to be positive. When you hear someone going for a run, you don't hear them say they ran 3 miles and then they ran -6 miles. Like, they just say they ran 3 miles and then they ran 6 miles. Distance is always positive. So remember, absolute value is always a positive number. So when we're asked to evaluate an expression, what we're asking you to do is I'm going to give you an expression, which is shown here, and I'm telling you what A is. So we are going to take this A, this 5 I should say, and we're going to put it in for A. So I'm going to rewrite absolute value of 5 minus 7 plus 15. Now, our calculators, they are very smart things, and they do order of operations for us, but they're actually not smart enough and programmed to do absolute value. So when we do this, what we have to do is absolute value is a grouping symbol. So I have to do this first. So if you would like to, you may want to do keep, change, because that's what you guys are used to doing. And then you can type into your calculator and figure out what is 5 plus a -7. And when you type that in, you will get -2. Now, you'll notice that the bars for the absolute value are still there. And the reason for it is because we have not taken the absolute value of the number yet. All we've done is simplified what's inside those 2 bars. Now we're going to ask ourselves, what is the absolute value of -2? And you guys are going to tell me that it is +2 because absolute value always becomes positive. And then we can now finally add these 2 numbers because the absolute value bars are gone. And so 2 plus 15 is 17. So that expression, when A is 5, is equal to 17. Example B, same thing. Here's my expression. Here's what x is equal to. So we're going to take this 2 and we're going to plug it in for x. So let's go ahead and write. So 23 minus absolute value of 3 minus 4 times 2 inside the absolute value. If you would like to do keep, change within the absolute value, totally fine. Again, our calculators are very smart. As long as you're using one of the scientific ones, we can type this all in one motion. So what I'd like you guys to do into your calculator, you're going to type in 3 plus -4 times 2. Let's go ahead and type in that whole thing into your calculator. And when you do that, you should end up with -5. And you'll notice I kept the absolute value bars there. Because again, we haven't said what's the absolute value yet. All we did is simplify what's inside here. Now, some of you guys are going to want to try to do keep, change here. Do not do that yet. That's why I didn't do it here first. Because we can't do that until we've taken the absolute value. So now we're actually going to say, what is the absolute value of -5? And you guys are going to tell me the absolute value of -5 is 5. Rewriting everything else. Now, if you wanted to keep change, you totally could. You would not have to, but most of you guys will do that. Then you use your calculator here to go ahead and simplify and figure out what 23 plus negative 5 is. And once you type that in, you should end up with 18. Excuse me. If you guys have questions on those two, go ahead and talk about it. See if you can help each other out. I didn't put a ton of examples like this on here because I know it's something we've practiced earlier this year, and I know something we practiced as a 7th grader, but something I wanted to review just to bring it back to you guys. Now, we're going to get into solving our absolute value equations, okay? One thing I want to remind you guys about, and you probably didn't realize this at all, but when you look at an absolute value, like if I gave you absolute value of d equals 10, there are really two solutions there. We don't know if the number inside here was a positive 10 or was the number inside of here a negative 10. So what we have to do is we have to assume it could be either one. So here's how I like to think about it. Now I know that not all of you guys celebrate Christmas. Most of you guys do. And this is just a really good analogy to go with it. So I apologize in advance if I offend anyone if they don't celebrate Christmas. Usually around Christmas time, as if you were a kid growing up and you celebrated it, you may have heard that in your stocking you might get coal, or you got like a good present if you were a good kid. Okay? Going to look at your stocking, you didn't know what was inside of it. So you're maybe preparing yourself for what would you do if you got a good present, or you prepare yourself if you got coal in your stocking. We want to think about that as we're solving these. We have to think about both cases and what we're going to do if our answer was a positive and if our answer was a negative. Now, I know with this explanation here, it doesn't always quite make sense yet. Once we see some examples, hopefully it'll start to click some more. So here are steps that we go through. Anytime you see an equation that has an absolute value sign in it, and again, an equation has an equal sign in it. The previous examples we looked at, they were not equations because there's not an equal sign. All the examples you see from here on out have an equal sign, so they're equations that are going to ask you to solve them. The first step is you're going to isolate the absolute value. So what that means is we want the absolute value to be the only thing on one side of the equal sign. Our last two examples that we look at are going to deal with this. So we won't have to worry about this to start with. I'll show you that example here in a little bit. The big thing for solving absolute value equations is this step 2. You're going to set the equation equal to a positive or a negative. And because we have two equations, mean you're going to have two answers or two possible answers. Again, the reason why we do this is because we don't know what was inside that absolute value, inside that gift. Was it a good thing, a positive, or was it a bad thing, a negative? So we have to prepare ourselves for both situations. And then in step 3, you're going to solve each equation. Step 4 would be, again, to check your solution. Any equation you can check. So if you would like to, you can check your solutions to see if they really do work. So let's take a look at our first equation. First thing I'm going to do is put a line down through the equal sign. The first step is to make sure that the absolute value is isolated. What that means is on one side of the equal sign, all I want to see is an absolute value bar with some stuff inside the absolute value. Everything needs to fall inside the absolute value. And this one it does. Again, hold tight. I will show you guys an example where it doesn't. So in this case, step 1 is done. Step 2 then says that we are going to split this apart into two equations. We're going to set what's inside the absolute value and set it equal to a positive 7. And we're going to set what's inside equal to a negative 7. And let me explain why that is. These absolute value bars are like the present to your gift. You have no idea what's inside your gift. It could be a really awesome thing, so it's a positive number. Or it could be a really crappy thing, and so it's a negative. We don't know what it is, so we have to solve both equations to figure out what two options it could be. So let's go through the process of solving both of these. Line through our equal sign. Keep, change, change. We undo addition or subtraction first. So opposite of plus is a minus, a -1 on both sides. So we're left with 2x equals, careful with your math, 7 minus -1 is 8. Dividing by 2, x equals 4. So here's one of our solutions. My dog Buster is saying hi. He has some itches and he's coming over to say hi. So that's what you're hearing. So let's solve our other one. Same thing, keep, change, change. Undo addition by subtracting a -1. Now, a lot of students here will say, but Mrs. Haugen, won't I get the same answer? You actually will not, because you're taking a -7 minus a -1. And when you type that into your calculator, you end up with -6. And when you divide by 2, you end up with x equals -3. So your two solutions are these two numbers. I could plug either one of these into our equation and end up with the same answer. Let me show you that's true. So I'm going to first check putting in a 4. So I'm going to check 2 times 4 minus 1, I'm hoping is equal to 7. Inside the absolute value, 2 times 4 is 8, minus 1 is 7. Absolute value of 7 is 7. So we end up with a true equation there. That's how this one works. Checking our other one, -3. 2 times -3 minus 1 should equal 7. Let's figure out what's inside our absolute value. 2 times -3 is -6, minus 1 is -7. The absolute value of -7 is 7. So again, those two check out. So that answer works too. So again, what's in red here are my checks. I'm checking to see, do those two answers work? Your choice if you want to do it on the homework. I wanted to do it on this example to show you that both of these numbers make this equation be true. Because we get to this point here where the inside is a positive, inside is a -7. So again, we don't know which one it is, so we have to assume both of these to be true. Now, let's look at another example of what you could see. This next one has the absolute value of p plus 6 equals a -5. I'm going to put a line through my equal sign. I always want to check to see, is the absolute value isolated? It is. I have absolute value with stuff in the middle. It's the only thing that's there. So the step 1 is done. Now, before we break this apart into two equations, I have a question for you guys. If I take the absolute value of a number, no matter what this is, could it ever equal a negative? And hopefully you're thinking, well, no, because when you actually take the absolute value of a number, it's always positive. So this can never happen. So this is an example of a no solution when we're working with absolute value. And for your answer, all you have to write is no solution or a 0 with a slash through it. I'm also going to write an explanation with it, just so you have it with your notes to look back at as far as like, well, why the heck can that never work? And the reason why is that absolute value can never equal a negative. And so what that means again is the original equation, when the absolute value bars are still there, can never equal a negative. In our previous example, when we split it into the 2, we did set it equal to a negative, but that was because we were actually solving it. If the original is equal to a negative, that can't happen. So if you look at the original and it's a negative, you can immediately stop and put no solution for your answer. All right, let's take a look at example C. Line through our equal sign. Quick check. Make sure that our absolute value is the only thing on this left-hand side, and it is. Let's do another check. It's equal to a positive number. Sweet. That means we can go ahead and solve by splitting it apart into 2. Again, we're pretending, or we're not sure if what's inside is a positive, a really good thing, or is it a negative. So I have to assume both. So I'm going to look at y plus 2 equals a positive 4, and y plus 2 equals a negative 4. Again, this is where we're assuming what's inside the absolute value gets to be a positive number. Here we're assuming what's inside the absolute value is a negative or a bad thing. We're going to solve, and we're going to find out what 2 options could it be. So on the first one, subtracting 2 from both sides. So you end up with y equals 2 for that solution. For our second one, same thing, subtracting 2, y equals negative 6. Now, I don't want to say ever because I feel like there's always an exception somewhere with it, but these 2 numbers, when you're solving, should never be the same. So I know on your homework assignment, I know for sure they're different. So if you end up with they are the same number, you did something wrong. So go back and check that again, okay? All right, example D. Line through our equal sign. We want to make sure the absolute value is the only thing on this left-hand side. It is. Good. Next check. Make sure it's equal to a positive number. Is this a positive number? Hopefully you're all like, no, that's not positive. Because we have this negative 1 here. So this means that this is, I'm sorry, a no solution. And again, you can do the 0 with a slash through it if you would like. Don't need to explain, we only did it on the other one, just so you can look back at your notes as far as like, why is that a no solution? So now let's take a look at an example where when I draw my line through my equal sign, and then I take a look, there's the absolute value and there's this number that's outside the absolute value. What I want you guys to think about is maybe remember as a kid, you had a clubhouse. Here are you and your friends in your clubhouse, and someone was trying to intrude in your clubhouse. Makes me think of Little Rascals when like the girls try to get into the boys' little like club that they have. So someone's intruding. So because there's this minus 3 on this side, that's not in the absolute value, we actually have to move that over to the other side. Now, you guys usually do keep, change, so I'm going to do that here. The opposite of plus is a minus, and then a negative 3. This goes away. So we have 5 minus x inside our absolute value equals, careful with your math, you get 7. Now, if I look, the absolute value is the only thing on this side, and it's equal to a number that's a positive. This now allows us to now do our two equations. We could not do it earlier because we had an intruder in with our absolute value. We have to get rid of this first before we can split it apart into the two. We only want the absolute value to be on this side. So now let's break it apart. So we have 5 minus x equals a positive 7, and 5 minus x equals a negative 7. Let's do keep, change, and I'm going to put a little 1 in front of that x. Keep, change. Did it for both of them. I don't know why I did it that way this time, but that's okay. Go ahead and solve. When we're solving, again, you always undo the number without the letter first. The good news is once you get to this step, the equations that you guys are solving are much easier than what we spent on Monday and Tuesday. Monday and Tuesday, in my opinion, are the hardest part in this unit. So if you're feeling pretty good about that, you are set for the rest of this unit. So we have to get rid of this 5. So we're going to minus 5 on both sides. So we're left with negative 1x equals 7 minus 5 is 2. Dividing by negative 1. So x equals negative 2 for one of our solutions. We're actually going to do the same process for solving. Still need to minus 5 on both sides. So we have negative 1x equals negative 12 dividing by negative 1. So x equals a positive 12. If you guys have questions about this, see if you guys can help each other out with it. This one is the hardest type that you'll see, only because you have to remember to move this to the other side first before you break it apart into the two equations. All right, our last example that we're going to take a look at. Line through our equal sign. Here is where our absolute value is, but there's something else on this side along with the absolute value that's not in it. We have this plus 2 here. We need to get rid of that plus 2. So to get rid of it, we are going to minus 2 first, because it is a positive, so to undo it, we subtract. So we have 7x plus 3 equals, careful with your math, 31. Now if we look, the absolute value is the only thing on this left-hand side. This means we can split it apart. And I should also say, and this is a positive 31. So we can go ahead and continue splitting apart. So we have 7x plus 3 equals 31. Notice when I write this other one with the negative, the only thing that changes signs is that 31. Everything else is identical to the sign that was there. Now we solve. Minusing 3 from both sides. 7x equals 28. Dividing by 7. And x equals 4. And now I know that I went through the process of solving here a little bit faster than I normally would. But my hope is once you see an example like this, you're pretty comfortable as far as doing the rest of the solving. This next one here, subtracting 3 from both sides. So you have 7x equals a negative 34. And then we divide by 7. And again, I was hoping to show you guys some stuff with the graphing calculators on these, but not quite. Well, and I don't even want to show you guys without me being there. But when you divide on this one, because you guys get a decimal, I'm going to have you guys round to the nearest tenth. So in your calculator, you're going to end up with a negative 4.857, yada yada. Keeps going. Remember, when you round to the nearest tenth, you look at the tens place and the number after it. So I'm looking at the 5, and this tells us to round the 8 up. So this becomes negative 4.9 for our other one. With absolute value, you can end up with decimals or fractions. For right now, you can give the answer in either form. Does not matter. I'm pretty sure on the homework there's only one that ends up being a fraction or decimal. I will leave that in the subnotes for sure once I get a chance to take a look at the answer key. But the rest of the time is for you guys to work on the solving absolute value equations worksheet. Make sure it's the solving one. There's another worksheet that's similar in name. Make sure it's the solving worksheet. Some other reminders: we're going to have a weekly review quiz on Monday. And then if you're someone planning to retake the Unit 3 test, that again has to be done before you leave school on Tuesday. Otherwise, the rest of class time is yours to work.